There was a particular university at which every pre-med student had to take a course in physics. And in this particular course, the professor was teaching, and one of the pre-med students got a little bored and said, why do we have to learn this stuff? And the professor, as you can imagine, was a little irritated, and he said, well, because it saves lives. About 5 minutes later, the student interrupts again and says, how does this physics class save lives? And the professor walked over to him and just stared at him for what seemed like an awful long time. Didn't stay where, just stared at him. And he backed up and he looked at the class and he says, this physics class, my physics class, saved lives by keeping certain people out of medical school. I want you to look with me at chapter 38 of the book of Genesis. We're going to read the whole chapter. Instead of me trying to explain it and recap it, I want to read the whole thing. And just as an upfront reminder, this chapter is unpleasant. It is uncomfortable. It is not found in devotional books. And it truthfully, most pastors never preach sermons about it. I'm not as smart as them, so I'm going to. But let's read the whole chapter and then we'll talk about it. It says, at that time, Judah left his brothers and went down to stay with a man of Adullam named Hira. There Judah met the daughter of a Canaanite man named Shua. He married her and lay with her. She became pregnant and gave birth to a son who was named She conceived again and gave birth to a son and named him Onan. She gave birth to still another son and named him Shelah. It was at Kezib that she gave birth to him. Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the Lord's sight, and so the Lord put him to death. And Judah said to Onan, lie with your brother's wife and fulfill your duty to her as a brother-in-law to produce offspring for your brother. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he lay with his brother's wife, he spilled his semen on the ground to keep from producing offspring for his brother. What he did was wicked in the Lord's sight, and so he put him to death also. Judah then said to his daughter-in-law Tamar, live as a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up. For he thought he might die too, just like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. After a long time, Judah's wife, the daughter of Shua, died. And when Judah had recovered from his grief, he went up to Timnah to the men who were shearing his sheep. And his friend Hira, the Adullamite, went with him. When Tamar was told, your father-in-law is on his way to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's clothes, covered herself with a veil to disguise herself, and sat down at the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that though Shelah had now grown up, she had not been given to him as his wife. And when Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. Not realizing that she was his daughter-in-law, he went over to her by the roadside and said, come now, let me sleep with you. And what will you give me to sleep with you, she asked. I'll send a young goat from my flock, he said. Will you give me something as a pledge until you send it, she asked. He said, what pledge should I give you? Your seal and its cord, and the staff in your hand, she answered. So he gave them to her, slept with her, and she became pregnant by him. After she left, she took off her veil and put on her widow's clothes again. Meanwhile, Judah sent the young goat by his friend, the Adullamite, in order to get his pledge back from the woman, but he did not find her. He asked the men who lived here, where is the shrine prostitute who was beside the road to Enaim? There hasn't been any shrine prostitute here, they said. So he went back to Judah and said, I didn't find her. Besides, the men who lived there said there hasn't been any shrine prostitute here. Then Judah said, let her keep what she has, or we'll become a laughingstock. After all, I did send her this young goat, but you didn't find her. About 3 months later, Judah was told, your daughter-in-law Tamar is guilty of prostitution, and as a result, she is now pregnant. Judah said, bring her out and have her burned to death. As she was being brought out, she sent a message to her father-in-law. I'm pregnant by the man who owns these, she said. And she added, see if you recognize whose seal and cord and staff these are. Judah recognized them and said, she's more righteous than I, since I wouldn't give her to my son Shelah. and he did not sleep with her again. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb. As she was giving birth, one of them put out his hand, and so the midwife took a scarlet thread and tied it on his wrist and said, "This one came out first." But when he drew back his hand, his brother came out, and she said, "So, this is how you've broken out." And he was named Perez. And then his brother, who had the scarlet thread on his wrist, came out, and he was given the name Zerah. The first question, that is worthy to be asked, excuse me, is why is this in the Bible in the first place? What is the point of this? What is the point of this being recorded and preserved and put in the flow of the book of Genesis? Let me suggest to you a couple of reasons. Number one, the Bible reveals real life. Right? This book is not some old book that is unrelated to real life. It reveals the way things really are. The Bible does not skip the embarrassing issues and the embarrassing scenes of life. It's one of the marks of its reality and its truth. If you or I were writing a book to make Israel, the nation of Israel and its history look good, we would not include this. You see, but God isn't interested in that. This book is about God and His greatness and His grace, even in some of the most embarrassing, sinful situations that His people find themselves in. So, the Bible is a real book about real people and real life, even some of the worst of life. Secondly, this period of time, right? We looked at a couple of weeks ago the start of the account that involves Joseph, right? Where he is sold off by his brothers and he winds up in Egypt. And the rest of the book of Genesis is pretty much about what transpires there. But this period of time is not all about Joseph. See, Joseph is actually about God saving Israel. Okay, and God is at work in chapter 38. In a way, He's going to save Israel, and we'll talk about that later. But it's not really all about Joseph. Thirdly, there are some significant lessons that come out of this book. One is this contrast between choices and behaviors. You see, you have Joseph gets introduced, and what happens to him? His life is going to take a certain course. And here's Judah, same family, and his life is going to take another course. Joseph is going to be dealt some hard cards. Judah seems to have the easy path. And we're going to look at where these choices, these behaviors, where they end up. And so there's a contrast here between Joseph and his life circumstances and Judah and his life circumstances. Much like the contrast between Abraham and Lot. The other time we read of an awful chapter in Genesis has to do with Lot, and it seems like the story is repeating itself. Our future is at stake in our choices. Another lesson that comes out of this is this whole idea of embracing situational ethics. What do I mean by that? Our ethics change from situation to situation. So one time something is wrong, another time it isn't, depending on the situation. Judah has a double standard for himself and Tamar. You see, she is not allowed to engage in prostitution, but he is. She should be burned, no accountability for him. It's a double standard. Situational ethics. It's right when I want it to be right, and it's wrong when I want it to be wrong, and nobody can tell me differently. This chapter also reveals our need for commandments. It reveals our need for boundaries. We need laws. We need moral laws. We need God to say, here are things you just don't do. And when you do them, it's not going to go well. We need God to give us boundaries. Left to ourselves, this is what happens. Thinking we can choose whatever we want to choose and do whatever we want to do, this is where it goes. And you probably don't need any more lesson in that than just watching the news every day. And you find out what happens in a world that rejects boundaries. It does not go well at all. So I think it's in the Bible for very good reasons, very intentional reasons. And God is asking us to look at two life courses and ultimately ask ourselves, which one am I on? Right? And where is God in these situations? The next thing I want to do about this chapter is I want to make sure we understand what went wrong and how it happens. Let me rephrase that by saying this. Here's what not to do with your life. For some of you, it may be obvious, for some not. But I want to be clear that we understand the life dynamics and choices that happened here. So that we see them, we understand them, and we don't repeat them. The first thing that goes wrong is this guy Jacob, Judah's father, and how he treated his children. How he treated the sons that were not from Rachel. You remember he's married to two women, Rachel and Leah. He loves Rachel, he's not so wild about Leah. And he doesn't really care that much about her kids. But the kids of Rachel, Joseph and Benjamin, he treats them better. Remember, Joseph gets the coat, and he is favored by his father. As much as it rests with you and is possible, try not to treat your children differently. You will, but don't go this far. Don't give one of them a coat that you don't give the other two. Right? This favoritism, it breeds problems. So it starts with Jacob. It starts with this dad. But then you have Judah's treatment of his brother Joseph. You remember when they captured him, they were going to do away with him? Judah says, this guy, Judah says, hey, if we just kill him, we won't really get anything out of that. Let's sell him. Let's make some money off the guy because he is our brother, right? Let's not kill him. Let's just sell him. And he's interested in himself and profiting for himself. Judah, we read, leaves his family, all right, and engages the Canaanite culture. He goes outside of faith in the God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. He steps out of that, and he goes the Canaanite way and takes a Canaanite wife, right? That never goes well. Right? To think that I can step out from under the Word of God, the promises of God, and the family of God. And to think that I can go and do life my way. And it really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what God you worship. It doesn't matter what truth you embrace. Whew. You bet it matters. What a mess happens. Because Judah wants to go that way. And again, we contrast that to his little brother Joseph, who doesn't get these kinds of freedoms. Right? He's a prisoner. We'll talk more about his life later. What else goes wrong? Well, you got these two sons of Judah, who are both described as wicked. Right? That means they are evil, and they're doing evil in God's sight. Evil and wickedness in God's sight is a real issue. There is such a thing as evil. There is such a thing as wickedness. And there are people who are evil and wicked by their choices and by their behaviors. And God isn't happy with it. Now, that is not politically correct. I don't know if anybody will watch this sermon down the road on YouTube, but that's the way it is. That's the message of the Bible. Evil and wickedness in our world is a real thing. Not all choices and lives are equal. And there's that awful line that says God had enough of them and he took their life, which is God's prerogative whether we like it or not. The question is, do we want to see things the way God sees them? Right? That's the question. Well, you can't judge anybody. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can't call anything wicked or evil. Yes, you can. Both of these boys, what they do is evil and wicked. That is not my assessment. That is God's assessment. And he lays things out. There's righteousness and unrighteousness. There's truth and there's lies. We don't author those things, but we sure do evaluate them in the life of other people, and we better evaluate them in our own life. And the question is, do I want to see what's in my life the way God sees it? If there's wickedness in my life, do I want to see it like God sees it, or truth as well? Judah then winds up lying to Tamar about his intentions. Why don't you go back home? You wait till my youngest son grows up. Well, he has no intention of doing that. He is concerned that this younger son live. He thinks she's bad luck. If I give him to her, maybe he'll die too. And he's not going to do it. He has no intention whatsoever. He's lying and deceiving her. Tamar then winds up trapping him, right? She lies and deceives Judah. I wonder where she learned that. Judah is more faithful in his word to a prostitute than he is to his own family. Right? He's willing to make a pledge and keep his word to this person he thinks is a prostitute, but he won't keep it with and to his own family. Judah then judges Tamar, but not himself. Jesus said, you know what? Before you go after somebody else's sin, take a look at your own. He put it this way. Take the log out of your own eye before you start going after the speck in somebody else's. And Judah is a prime illustration of that. Bring her out and have her burned. Right? He won't judge himself, but he's very willing to judge her. And he winds up saying, she's more righteous than I. Now that is a comparison. That is not a condition. He is not saying that Tamar is righteous. He's saying she's more righteous than me. That's like two people in prison saying the other guy is a better criminal than me. It's a comparison, right? It's not necessarily a good thing. That's Judah's assessment, not God's verdict. So don't read this chapter and think, oh, God is approving of her. No, he is not. He is not at all. That's Judah's assessment. When he looks at what he did, and he looks at what she did, he thinks, wow, she's more righteous than me. Neither of us are that well off. So those are all the things that go wrong here. Things that can get duplicated in our life. Right? The desire to control and manipulate and lie and judge others but not ourselves. To engage in evil. It all happens and it doesn't go well. So what do we walk away with? You read chapter 38, what are we supposed to walk away with? Let me suggest at least two of the big things. The first one is this. We have to take responsibility for our choices in the circumstances of life. Okay? So Joseph is sold off down into Egypt. He is going to have to take responsibility for what he does in his circumstances. And here's Judah, who's going to have to take responsibility for himself. Joseph grew up blessed. He had 17 years of a blessed life. Joseph got rejected. Right? He bragged a little bit about his standing and the dreams that God gave him. And he got rejected, sold off, and enslaved. Joseph lost control, and he lost freedom. Others imposed that on him. And so some people in their life get thrust down a path in which they do not have certain freedoms and certain control. That's Joseph. He's going to have to do what Potiphar tells him. He's going to have to do what Pharaoh tells him. But here's Judah. Grows up blessed as well. He grows up in a family of wealth and power. Right? This family of Jacob, they are wealthy, they are powerful, and God has been protecting them. Judah grows up with opportunity and freedom. He's not somebody else's servant, enslaved. He is free to go where he wants to go and do what he wants to do. And he chooses the Canaanites. He chooses to leave the boundaries and the family of God and to do as he pleases. He chooses to try to control his own future, marry who he wants to marry, and to not hold any of his kids accountable as well. He chooses to control who his heir is going to be. Right? So Judah's withholding this son from Tamar. Why? Because he wants that son to be his heir. That's who he has left. And if his line's going to continue, it's going to be through him. And he's doing everything he can to control that while he also wants to be free to do whatever he wants to do. And so he engages a shrine prostitute. In case you're wondering, what is that? That is these people who have been set apart in that culture, right, to engage in prostitution as a way to bring the favor of the gods upon the country, to make the place fertile so that we produce. It's a sick religious belief. And that's where this man goes. That tells you how far Judah has gone. You see, at this point, Judah can't blame his dad. He can't pull the card out, well, Daddy didn't love me. Can't do it. He's way down the road from that. He's making his own choices. His dad's not forcing him. So he can't blame Dad. He can't blame Joseph, because Joseph is gone, right? He sold him off. He got rid of the problem. So he can't blame Joseph. He certainly can't blame God. God has given him every opportunity to be born into this family at this time, and what God is doing with them and giving them this land. He can't blame God. And what does he do in the end? He loses control. He loses control of his future. He loses control of who his heir will be and how it will all happen. He loses it all. Commenting on this scene, Derek Kidner says this: "There is a plunge from grace whenever faith in God is no longer an active force." A plunge from grace. Judah had grace from God. He literally had it made to be born into this family, this wealth, and this power, and given this land, all the promises of God, all the covenant, all his. Joseph seems to have been sold away from that and out from under it. And he's under somebody else's control, but this guy has freedom, and he has the grace of God, and he takes a deep, deep plunge, because believing in God was no longer the active force in his life. One of the things we've got to walk away from here is that when I go out on my own, I take responsibility for me. When I leave God, when I leave his word behind, when I leave his ways behind, it's all on me. I have nobody else to blame. And Judah doesn't, and we see where it goes. The second thing we take away from this is that God is faithful to his promises. He's faithful to his covenant despite the sins of the people to whom he gives the promises in the covenant. Let's remember, Judah is going to be one of the 12 tribes. Right? This guy, his name is going to be on a geographical area of Israel. His name is eventually going to be on the southern kingdom when it's divided. That's who he is. And God will be faithful to what God has said. He will be faithful to his covenant. He will be faithful to the future of Israel. He will be faithful to the future of this tribe, despite the sins of Judah. You see, Judah is going to have an heir through his firstborn's wife. Did you notice the text? It says, verse 6, Judah got a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. See, Judah did this. It doesn't say that, went out and got his own wife like Judah did. That's what he did. But no, Judah can't let her go out and do this. Judah gets the wife. He arranges it and he organizes it. And they get married, no kids. That should be the line through whom his heir comes. And he says, look, son number 2, why don't you fulfill your obligation so that there's an heir through your older brother? Well, he's not going to do it. And then Judah won't do it. But he is going to have an heir through his firstborn's wife. See, there's going to be a child who gets conceived in sin by Judah and by Tamar, who I will remind us is a Canaanite Gentile. A child conceived in sin would be in the lineage of the Messiah, Jesus. You read the lineages in Matthew and Luke, and you will read the name Perez. Son of Judah through Tamar. A child conceived in sin by Judah and Tamar, the Gentile Canaanite, will be in the line of the Messiah Jesus, who will become known as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now, if I'm him, I'd like to come through a different tribe. I don't want this guy. I don't want this to be my family tree. But it is. And it is because of the grace of God. It is despite the sin of the people to whom the covenant and the promises were given. You see, the point of this chapter isn't that sin didn't matter. See, you could read this and go, well, it didn't really matter. Right? God's going to do what he's going to do. It doesn't matter if people sin. You could very easily read that, and it could almost seem to make sense. But that's not the issue, that sin doesn't matter. It does matter. People die in this chapter. Horrific things happen because sin does matter. The point is this: the great faithfulness and grace of God, that he will make a people for himself, and he will work through this line, and he will bring his son into the world, despite the effort and the sins of people and Satan to keep it from happening. That's grace, right? Who is God going to find that's not sinful? What line, what tribe is there that is untainted, that is this pure ancestry through whom which to come? It does not exist in this world. And so God says, I'm going to do it. And you're free to do what you want to do. But I'm going to be faithful to what I've promised, to make a nation and a people. And ultimately, through one line, I'm going to bring my son. And I'm coming into this world. And it's going to be Judah, even if Judah wants something different. You see, this is the grace of God, that here is this boy named Perez. And he's going to be named in the lineage of Jesus. Interesting that he is the product of a Jew and a Gentile. I don't know how much you think about the lineage of Jesus, probably not very much, but there's a lot of Gentile in the lineage. Kind of symbolic, right? That he's the Lord of every tribe and tongue and nation. He's going to bring Jew and Gentile together in the church through the cross. The seeds of it are all right here. So, we get to the end of this, and maybe you find yourself in the position of Joseph. You've been dealt some cards you didn't ask for. You can't necessarily trace any one act or choice or sin that has led you down a road where you have kind of lost control of what is happening, and you're at the disposal of other people. And you're wondering, where is God? I would remind you of what happens immediately after chapter 38, and that's 39, verses 1 and 2. Verse 2 says, "The Lord was with Joseph, and he prospered, and he lived in the house of his Egyptian master." You see, God can be with you, even when things have happened to you that you haven't chosen, you've not asked for. And here's this line, and here's Joseph. God's with him. Do not think for a moment that the people who are born into this world, who have the privilege of wealth and power and freedom, that God is with them and not you. The truth is, his grace is working in both situations. And Joseph's choices are going to be different. You know, we don't hear and see Joseph doing or manipulating hardly anything at all. He's strangely silent through the course of his life, right? And he's letting God work things out. Not Judah, whole different line. But if you're Joseph this morning, I would remind you, God is being gracious to you. You just hang in there. You just give it time. You may not understand how and why, and you may be willing to blame your brothers or whoever. Just give it time. Right? Give God time and let him work out what he's working out. But if you're in the line of Judah and Tamar, you need to understand that God wants to work in your future by his grace. And you may have done some things and are doing some things, but God can still work in your future. And it's time for you to see them, and when you see them, you see you, and you're supposed to slap yourself on the forehead and say, what am I doing? What am I doing? I need to get back to the Word of God. I need to get back to the people of God. I need to get back under the umbrella of the covenant and the promises. And you need to take heart, because God brings his Son through the line of these kinds of people. And maybe you might be thinking, you know what? I've already screwed up my life. And I just don't know what could come out of it now. Well, that's not up to you. Respectfully, that's not up to you. That's up to God. That's up to the grace of God and the faithfulness of God. And maybe he can do something because of his grace and faithfulness, despite your sin, down the road, in the future, through somebody else. So, where are you today? Where are you? What are you doing? And why? What road are you pursuing? Joseph refuses to be a victim, and Judah can't claim to be a victim either. Both of them can know the grace of God. One can embrace it, and the other happens despite it. And I pray, whichever road you're on today, you will see that God is faithful to his word and to his promises. And we come back to him, and we ask for his grace and his strength, no matter what happens in our life. Let's pray.